I'm Michael Beck, the host of the MicTheMike podcast. If you've been following along with me, it's great to have you back here again. And if you're listening in for the first time, welcome. This is a place to talk about the arts as well as personal well being. Sometimes I'll talk more about art, while other times I'll talk more about mental and physical health. But regardless of the topic, I hope to encourage greater openness and understanding as I seek to better understand myself and the things and people around me. All right, well, welcome back again. As of this recording, it is the 6th of the new year, 2024. And yeah, I've had a lot of stuff that's literally happened on the new year. I've had some stuff that I've been processing through even before during the holidays. And so I'd like to try to get around to sharing and processing through some things as I do on the channel. Now, one potential elephant in the room that I'm going to go ahead and address is that I am not recording in the same room that I have since the start of the podcast. So things may sound a little bit different. More specifically, there might be some sounds of passing cars and whatnot that might get picked up by the microphone. And I'm thinking that shouldn't really be an issue. But just saying this for myself, if I hear it, if you all hear it, that's what it is. And yeah, it's going to be all right. At least for now, it's how it's going to sound. And yeah, but maybe it will add to the authentic experience. You can feel like you're right here with me in my room as I'm saying this. So yeah, we'll go with that. But in the meantime, I would just like to share a short story that I had written and that I shared on my other account that I do writing poetry, lyrics and things. So yeah, I was going to share that on here and then share some reflections. And I just found that as I'll also be sharing just something that started out as a poem turned into a narrative, and then just as I reflected on it, there was just much more there than I maybe even realized at first. That yeah, just I think really speaks to a lot of what I've been working through and very much what I'm currently even still going through. But yeah, the podcast has first and foremost been a place for me to work through and process through things that are happening with me personally, and things also that I observe happening culturally and globally. And so yeah, we're going to do some more of that here now. And I hope that, as always, that it will be of some encouragement to you, or that you can resonate with in some way, but at the very least, maybe that you can just glean something from it. Maybe it's just one small thing. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. In my 31 years, I've only been writing lyrics and poetry for but a short time. Up until this point, I have done little in the way of writing stories or narratives, and what few things that I have written, I have never shared online. I guess I've always kind of thought of writing stories as something that authors do for their great big novels. And it's for this reason that I found the idea quite daunting and also lacking in my interest or perceived attention span for such a task. And I thought authors are readers, and I'm not that. However, with regards to reading, recently I have been doing more of that. And as I've been reading the works of Lovecraft, I've been realizing that writing stories is not only about writing great big tales. Short stories are perfectly viable as well. In fact, some of my favorite stories that I was introduced to in high school were short works from authors such as Ray Bradbury and Stephen King. Now, shortly after writing the story, but prior to sharing it online, I had made a post kind of hinting at it, and I shared these thoughts. I'm just thinking out loud. The other day I began writing a piece that started out as poetry, but then quickly turned into a kind of story. Occasionally in my poetry and lyrics, I'll have a very loose concept of a narrative, but I don't know, this felt a bit different to me somehow. It's very short and abstract, and yet it combines and perhaps in some ways adds some elements into a bit of a fiction that I've been dreaming about, which tries to connect the work of Lovecraft with the newer and ever-evolving concept of the backrooms. This all feels a bit silly to share, as it does seem outside of my usual practice and what I feel that I'm proficient at. But hey, if you're going to start, you have to start somewhere, right? At this point, I'll look at sharing that short story on here. Until then, I'm using this as a preemptive introduction. I don't expect to do a lot of this kind of writing, but again, who knows? We'll see. I never would have thought that writing poetry and sharing it would be the kind of thing that I would be doing on any sort of regular basis. So my thanks to you reading this for your support of my work. Here's to staying creative. Cheers. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and read that short story, which I would say, yes, is very, very short, and yet, ironically, just long enough that it doesn't fit in the description of a post on Instagram. But all right, here we go. My father was the threat of punishment. My mother was certain death. Long had I walked upon the sea of regret. Over and over the waves would grip and pull me under. My ears did ring with anxiety like the sound of thunder. I was forced into that foul dark water, down and down, so that I could not see, and I could not breathe. Yet by fortune or fate, I crossed over the great thin plain. There was a cut in the world, and I was like the blood, ready to be released. I found it, that place beyond the wall of sleep. I had discovered the bleed, and so became immersed within that liminal space, which some call the back rooms. And I, for a moment, having escaped time and space, revisited the memories that I had long forgotten, or had forgotten to remember, days upon days before yesterday. And how long had it been since I returned, even in thought? Not everything was as I remember, and I had to wonder what was real and what was mere memory, dreams, or memories of dreams. I saw times before so many shames and mistakes were made. I saw horrors and fantasies, and horrors of some fantasies realized. I felt like a mountaineer, free climbing, without a tether, and if I should fall, I would find a fate worse than death. But was I not already living in my own personal hell? Why should I not trade my present misery for some unknown mystery? So though filled with both wonder and terror, at first, I found my resolve enough to conquer some of my fear, and through the bleed I did return, and thought perhaps upon revisiting, oh, the things that I could learn. And indeed many lessons I had forgotten, or never had I learned. And I thought, I will not awake until I see this through. I was as though asleep in a kind of waking dream, in which I did pass room after room, corridor after corridor, level after level, ascending and descending. For too long did I linger and forget the present, or any possible future. Yet by fortune or fate, try as I might to stay, I could not delay, for I am not the master of time and space. And so I came back from beyond, as though eons had passed. I was still me, and yet somehow not the same. Not everything was as I remember, and I had to wonder what was real and what was mere memory, dreams, or memories of dreams. So that was my short story, and I am now going to get into my reflections on it. So although I have not made a habit of taking inspiration from or incorporating my dreams into my work, I did so with this one dream that I could vaguely recall upon waking one morning. I recall even less now. You would think that I would try to write down what I could remember, but I haven't made a record of my dreams in months, maybe even years. And it happens that this wasn't one of my many anxious nightmares, but something more inspired. I had been contemplating the idea of what has become referred to as cosmic horror, and trying to make connections between Lovecraft, the father of cosmic horror, and the Backrooms, a modern cosmic horror mythos, which has come about as a sort of internet phenomenon. And it's if I were going to try to describe the Backrooms, it is often unnerving, at times terrifying, and at others beautifully fascinating. I feel that it really taps into something from within the subconscious that feels, the feeling within a dream where things look familiar, but it's only after you wake that you realize that nothing was quite how you remember from reality. You find things disjointed, askew, and the result is a feeling that is very uncanny. And my ruminating on these things was clearly channeled into this one particular dream. And so to try to recount and recall what little I can from the dream, I was in a hotel, vast and grand in size. I don't know how I came there and why I was there, but that's often seems to be how it goes when remembering dreams. I remember being in a closet, opening up some luggage, entering it, and finding myself transported to another part of the hotel. I remember finding and befriending someone, though who found who first and who first between us discovered these portals, I don't remember. But it seems that there was some need of secrecy and such a doorway or passage, which would allow us to meet and move between rooms undetected. It was presumed that there were many such portals, though I can only remember finding and using two of them. The one that I just mentioned, and another that I found, which is much more striking and dramatic of the two. I remember entering an elevator, and after the doors had closed, it began to fill with water. And once filled, just as I began to panic, I found myself surfacing from an indoor pool. Although I rarely remember any specific words from my dreams, I distinctly remember someone referring to these portals as the bleed or a bleed. It seems that there was a corporation involved that was aware of the bleed and was using them to their own ends. But to what end they were, use it, if it was stated or shown in my dream, I can't remember, and I can only speculate and brainstorm potential ideas. Transportation, like was used by my companion and I, is one obvious answer. But more specifically, I had the idea that the bleed might be used as a means of attempting to dispose of toxic waste. But yeah, never really totally have thought that through yet. But yeah, that's as far as the dream goes. As I said again, I was not thinking of a narrative at first. I was only writing a poem from words which were coming to mind. Again, as I mentioned, I realized that the story is rather vague in many ways. But yeah, as I began to see a story unfolding, I tried to flesh it out more, add more detail. So I started adding more of these elements from my dream, and I began trying to mimic the kind of Old English that I've been reading from Lovecraft's work, as well as including references to the names of his stories, such as mentioned Beyond the Wall of Sleep and From Beyond. And further details could still certainly be added to this or another related story, as much of the writing is still made up of poetic words and symbolism. But as such, I thought it would be good to try to unpack and process the meaning and like what the heck was going on in my head when I was writing it. So yeah, here we go. I'm going to try to go line by line and try to break things down as best as I can. If you made it this far, I trust that this conversation has been of some value to you. If my assumption is not incorrect and you would like to show your appreciation, I invite you to share this episode with a friend or a loved one you think might appreciate it as well. Virtually any way that you can interact with the podcast, whether it be to like and or comment on my posts, or to share it or save it. All of these seemingly small things can help to support my work. And if you have the means and would like to show your appreciation through a donation, or like to buy me a coffee, you're welcome to visit MicTheMike.wordpress.com/support. You can find this on my website in the episode's description, as well as in the link in my bio of my Instagram. Alright, now back to the episode. With the poem titled My Mother Was, that I had previously written shortly before this, I had a line, my mother was the threat of punishment, and so I was playing with this sort of idea and language of infancy, child upbringing, and through parental nurturing and or other social influences, receiving certain messages and ideas. I was continuing to play with this concept, and I had the words, my father was the threat of punishment, my mother was certain death, stick out of my mind. I'll be coming back to these themes reflected in another line to come later. And now that I think about it, the words death and regret do not rhyme, but I believe that the line long had I walked upon the sea of regret came about as I was trying to work within a rhyming convention. Over and over the waves would drip and pull me under. My ears did ring with anxiety like the sound of thunder. These lines were building upon the idea of regret holding us back, along with a looming and thunderous sense of fear from a perceived threat of punishment. I think that I only came around to it later, but what became the next few lines is I was forced into that foul dark water, down and down so that I could not see and I could not breathe. Yet by fortune and fate I crossed over the great thin plain, was again inspired by my dream, in particular going into the elevator which filled up with water. Although this also seems to build upon the idea of somehow walking on water over the sea, quote unquote, and perhaps only in hindsight I started seeing a parallel, or perhaps my mirroring of the biblical story of the disciple Peter as he stepped out of his boat to walk on the water with Jesus, but how he began to sink once he took his eyes off him and instead turned them to the waves beneath him. And I like the idea of finding the light or the other side of suffering and trial by going through it, by going in and through a great void of darkness. And I was thinking of it maybe as a sort of baptism with the imagery of death, burial, and resurrection. As it has been written, we are buried, therefore, by baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might walk in newness of life. That on the other side of suffering, the thing that was meant to kill us, there may be a new and renewed life and knowledge to be found. This maybe goes back to the idea and term of the wounded healer that I would have mentioned in a previous episode. And so in my story, it is in and through the water, in his darkest moment, that my character passes through from one place of reality or existence to another, or another way of looking at it, and an idea that I will be touching more on later, going from one point of view and then having a sort of revelation or a kind of illuminating vision which brings about another perspective or state of awareness. There was a cut in the world, and I was like the blood ready to be released. I'm not sure how I came upon the term the bleed and how it may made its way into my dream, but perhaps there's something there with the idea that blood is meant to stay inside the body, but when the skin is severed, it can pass through, going from one space to another, from the inside to the outside. And thinking further and perhaps more abstractly, I was thinking if we all aren't like small blood vessels as part of a much larger body in terms of the world and society. And I think working with the aforementioned idea of suffering and death, that to be cut and to bleed are universal and primal symbols of those things. I found it that Place Beyond the Wall of Sleep. Again, as before mentioned, Beyond the Wall of Sleep is the title of a related and relevant story by Lovecraft. I love the name and the imagery that it creates, and so I wanted to include it here. I had discovered the bleed, and so became immersed within that liminal space, which some call the backrooms again, all things which I had previously addressed except liminal space. As I understand it, for something to be liminal, it is transitional, such as a hallway. These are places that we tend to pass in and out of, but that we typically don't spend much time in. The same is typically true of a backroom or a storage area. We go in to retrieve things and to return things, but it's not a living room or a meeting room. As such, we might find it a bit unsettling to spend extended periods of time in these spaces or to look at imagery of them for this reason. And certainly in life, if we find ourselves feeling that we are spending too much time or feeling stuck in a place of transition, it can feel very uncomfortable. The reality is that we are more often than not moving from one point in our lives to another, and as soon as we arrive somewhere, it's usually not long before we are looking at moving on to the next thing. I think that there's something to be said for being present to the moment and finding contentment where we find ourselves within those places and periods of transition. And I, for a moment having escaped space and time, revisited the memories that I had long forgotten or had forgot to remember days upon days before yesterday. And how long had it been since I returned, even in thought? Not everything was as I remember, and I had to wonder what was real and what was mere memory, dreams, or memories of dreams. Again, this speaks to the obscured quality of dreams, but also to the limitations and possible fracturing of memory and recollections. And I find that I can experience a strange paradox in which I can look back and deceive myself into thinking that things were somehow better or easier when it generally was never that simple. Perhaps some aspects were, but there were always challenges and difficulties that I was navigating. It's just that perhaps only now that they seem smaller and more trivial. At the same time, with all of those challenges and difficulties, when looking back, it can be a challenge for me to pinpoint specific memories that I am fond of, that I remember as being generally positive and joyful experiences. And so it's this bittersweet thing of looking back and thinking that things must have been better, and yet at the same time, being unable to reminisce about specific life events. One of the biggest problems of anxiety and depression is that it causes the individual to lose perspective on things. From my personal experience with these things, a loss of perspective can impact my memory and make it hard to recall things in general. It's hard to have a mind that's really open and available to retain new information when it's in a state of panic or disillusionment. So I feel that much of this story is about awareness and finding a new perspective, but these few lines speak specifically to this idea. I saw times before so many shames and mistakes were made. I saw horrors and fantasies, and horrors of some fantasies realized. I felt like a mountaineer free climbing without a tether, and if I should fall, I would find a fate worse than death. Some of this deals with existentialism and deconstruction, but primarily the idea of trying to do the shadow or self work by allowing ourselves to confront and deal with things from our past. And this is no easy task. If it were, people would, obviously do it and do it more. But was I not already living in my own personal hell? Why should I not trade my present misery for some unknown mystery? So, though filled with both wonder and terror at first, I found my resolve enough to conquer some of my fear, and so through the bleed I did return. I thought perhaps upon revisiting, the things that I could learn, and indeed many lessons I had forgotten or never had I learned. I thought I will not awake until I see this through. These lines build on the ideas already established and harken back to the first two lines with the threat of punishment and death. That is, what is described is a sort of hell to know that you're going to one day die and that life is fleeting, but to also be so dreadful of potentially doing the wrong thing and being punished for that, that you become frozen, paralyzed. And so there's a decision that's made here to act and pursue the unknown and its mystery rather than remaining in a stagnant state of misery from anxiety and depression. This means going to and revisiting scary places. When I talk about revisiting, this refers to being intentional to do the shadow/self work by facing things which have been unaddressed and have not been worked through. And the notion of I will not awake until I see this through, I believe speaks to a lack of understanding or forgetting that self work and any kind of healing takes time. It's a process and hard work, and striving doesn't make things go any faster. It's the same way that, doesn't make grief, the healing go any faster. So, if anything, trying to force things only creates more problems, as haste does not create time and space for healing. I was as though asleep in a kind of waking dream, in which I did pass room after room, corridor after corridor, level after level, ascending and descending. For too long did I linger and forget the present or any possible future. I had talked about being present and content and not looking too much into the future. The opposite place that we can find ourselves and that can remove us from being present and content is to dwell on the past. And so I touch on that here with the idea of spending too much time dwelling on the past to a point that it becomes counterproductive. We are only human. As such, we can't be doing the self work all the time, and we need to give ourselves breaks. Again, healing is not a race, and we can't rush it. Along with that, this speaks to the juxtaposition and the kind of back and forth, the ups and downs of the healing process. We have moments of progress, and we have moments that seem like setbacks. And sometimes the moments that feel like progress, again, are a sign of or a result of impatience in trying to force things. And other times, the moments that feel like setbacks are actually progress. Yet by fortune and fate, try as I might to stay, I could not delay, for I am not the master of time and space. And so I came back from beyond, as though eons had passed. I was still me, and yet somehow not the same. Not everything was as I remember, and I had to wonder what was real, and what was mere memory, dreams, or memories of dreams. A couple of Lovecraft stories end with the same words that he would use towards the beginning. There's something that I like about the way that this creates bookends. Moreover, it serves to create a loop in which you go on a journey throughout a tale, but that you begin and end in the same place. As much as we may like or try to keep our mind in thoughts of the past or future, I find that life has a way of pulling us back to the present. It may not feel like a good thing, but I believe that it is for the best. Looking into the past and the future, like everything else, should be done in moderation. We are meant to be present. It's thoughts, anxieties, and shame from the past, then projected onto the present and the future, which remove us from the present moment. If we can have greater awareness/perspective and at the same time surrender, let go of our need for control, we can more often give ourselves more fully to the moment of being present and existing, being content with our internal and our external world. But yeah, that's all the reflections that I had written down or initially thought of But certainly there's much more to think through and to share, and certainly I have been doing so honestly with my therapist, and that seems to be really has been helpful. But yeah, I mean, and I'd be curious to know if any of this resonates with you, or what you can uncover and unpack for yourself. And of course, that's why one of the reasons that I share anyhow. Yeah, it'd be great to glean and hear from you and what your thoughts are, and how you can add to the conversation. So, and yeah, so thank you as always for joining me to consider and contemplate these things with me. And until next time, stay well and take care. Thank you for tuning in to Mike the Mike. If you have any comments or have a suggested topic for a future episode, or if you would like to inquire about joining me on the podcast, you can email me at beckm.podcast@gmail.com, or you can direct message me on Instagram at MicTheMike.fm. You can find all those addresses mentioned, as well as any related links and citations for this episode, listed in the episode's description.